welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Turn the Page, the official podcast of Syosset Public Library. This is Jenn, your co-host for today, and I'm here with the author of a book that I have just read and absolutely loved. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Hi, I'm B.R. Myers, and the book that we are speaking about is called A Dreadful Splendor.
Excellent. So this is your first book for adults, from what I understand, but it's not your first book by a long shot. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your writing career and how it led you to this book.
Okay. Well, yeah, so I first started writing YA, and long ago, my sister and I think Twilight was really big at that time. And my sister and I were on summer vacation. We're both nurses. And I think maybe the Twilight movie was going to come out. So there must have been the third book must have been happening at that point. And her daughters were teenagers. And we had just come from the bookstore. We were like a line up to get the latest book. So it's funny because we were sort of, sitting at the cottage and we were saying, oh my gosh, that Stephenie Meyer, she must be so rich. And this was like before it sort of, took over the world. And then my sister turns to me, no kidding, she looked at me and she said, you should write a book. And I think it was the big joke was that, I'll write a book, it'll become world famous, and we'll both be able to retire from nursing early, right? So, we're still nursing, by the way. That was about 15 years ago. So I do credit her for, planting that little seed, that inspiration to see if, I could write a book or not. So I think it all started from there. And the stories that come to me are usually just a scene, vignette, and it's sort of stuck on repeat in my mind. And then I start asking myself questions like, okay, is this the beginning? Is it the middle? Is it the end? Whose story is this? And eventually, the story and the writing evolves from that point. I have a couple YAs under my belt. I have a couple romance novels under a different name under my belt. And I have always really been drawn to ghost stories. So I think when the time came where I wasn't writing a book for another publisher, I thought, okay, I'm going to finally write this ghost story that's been in my mind that I've wanted to get down on paper. And I think I had to learn the craft and go through those steps before I got to this book. And when I first wrote A Dreadful Splendor, I wasn't really actually thinking, okay, I'm going to write an adult book. The scene just came to me, and it was the scene where it's I had it's a fake seance, and I thought, well, what it would be like if you had all of this set up, if someone was staging a seance, staging to swindle mourners, but what would happen if the actual real ghost showed up? What would happen then? Mm-hmm. So that's the story that's the kernel that started this story off. So I just wrote it from there. I wasn't thinking about where it would fit on the shelf, what the competition would be or anything like that. I just wrote it for myself. And at the time I had just published Rogue Princess, which is with Macmillan, and that was a YA science fiction space adventure. So I sent it to them, and they said, wow, we love this, but it's not YA. This totally feels adult. And I said, okay, well, no. And then I just ventured off, sort of looking for an agent who was looking for that kind of story in the adult genre. So that's how that happened. I'm sorry, that was a really long answer.
No, it's great. That's so interesting. I really like this idea that you kind of, didn't think about or didn't worry too much about the categories that the book would fall into before you wrote it. You just kind of let it be its own thing. And was that very different from your earlier books? Like, did you consciously write for certain demographics? Did your process change a little bit, or?
In the beginning, when I was writing YA, I I believe when I was, the great thing about YA is that you've got characters who are, their logic, their problem solving, it's all based, emotionally. So the difference with adults is that, we're kind of, although yes, sometimes we do use our emotions when we're making decisions, but it doesn't all come from there, and it's not as intense. So when you're writing, an adult novel, the motives for your characters are different than when you're writing YA. So when I was writing YA, I was keeping that in my mind. I was reading my diary from high school because it helps put you in that frame of mind, because it is a totally different uh, dynamic, problem solving wise from YA to adult. So I would say early on, that's what I thought when I was working with YA. I wasn't so much thinking about, um, market wise. I was thinking about who is this book intended for, because there are a lot. I mean, YA is great. I mean, it's just, when I was growing up, it was like two shelves, right, at the library. And now it's a huge section, which is great. So it's a very broad spectrum, for YA. So you have a lot of adults who do enjoy YA because it's very high YA. But I think basically when I was writing my YA, I was thinking about teens who would be writing it. So I wanted to make sure that the characters were relatable. Which when I was reading my diary, man, that was golden, because it really gave me insight to how I thought back then. And I was like, oh my gosh, what a nut.
Yeah, it's like an interesting exercise in empathy, right? Because you have to sort of like identify again with this mindset that you totally left behind. This sounds like a very interesting exercise.
Oh, it was so embarrassing. Oh my gosh. I think there's actually, I remember on CBC, which is like the Canadian Broadcast Corporation up here. I remember they were doing a segment where was famous people or different people were reading from their high school diaries, and it was hilarious. It was great. And you remember how dramatic everything was. You had a bad hair date, it ruined everything. And the other side is like, oh, the cute guy in history finally smiled at me, so yeah, it was a great day, right?
Yeah. Oh, that is like really that's really interesting, and it is really like fun to think about having to connect with, your previous self in order to write for like a younger audience. Um, so one of the things I'm wondering is what drew you to this world of the world of like seances and spiritualism and trying to make contact with the other side.
Well, it's funny because when you go to sleepovers, back in my day, sleepovers, you would do, yeah, we got the Ouija board out, and then there was always some like, are you pushing it? No, are you pushing it? No, are you pushing it? Of course, we're always asking a boy, what a crush on who, and then you would do the thing where it's heavy as lead, light as a feather. Everyone's one person's lying like a corpse, and they levitate. So I guess it was kind of instilled in me, and I've always really enjoyed like the shivers, and I've always liked a good horror movie. So when I went here, I'll take and it started. My mom is a big Vincent Price fan. So I'm in grade 3. I'm sick home from school one day. She lets me stay home, but she lets me watch TV. And the local channel every afternoon, it was called Academy Performance, and they would show, typically in black and white movie. And this day, when I'm home, they played The Pit and the Pendulum with Vincent Price. And I think a lot of it went over my head at the time, but the last 10 seconds of that movie really went, and it was just like, oh my gosh, did that just happen? And it was just so shivery, and it really stuck with me, obviously, because I was 8 at the time, a long time ago. And my mom was watching with me, and she, was saying, oh, I love Vincent Price. This is going to be so good. And she was telling me about when she was, 14 or so, she and her cousin Audrey and their best friend Betty had gone to see House of Wax, which is another really good Vincent Price movie. So when they came out of there, they're walking home, and there's really big, beautiful trees, in her hometown where they lived. And they were convinced that he was hiding, behind the bushes in the shadows. So they screamed and they ran all the way home. And I think those two ideas sort of gelled, and I remember thinking, oh well, like, are you kidding me? How would you like, for the way that horror makes you, convinces you that there's something in the shadows when you know there isn't, but you still react in that way. So I've always been drawn to those stories that give you the goosebumps, and always those kind of movies. Not necessarily, although I do really enjoy a good horror movie too, but not necessarily, things that jump out, right? Those jumpy scares, those are fun too. But I find that when it's, a slow, kind of building suspense, and you have, there's an idea, it's like something is, it looks normal, but, or not normal, but it looks okay, but there's something that is just not right. And I love those moments when it's just a, that subtle turn of the screw, right? And it just keeps building and building. And when you don't have those moments where like the cat jumps out and you oh, you scare you, when you don't have those moments, the suspense just keeps building and building, and you have no release. So I I like those moments where it's, that subtle building of creepiness, I guess.
Me too. I really love that kind of slow burn horror.
Mm.
And that's always been my favorite kind of horror movie too. Like I've just always been really into ghosts. And I think there's something, that you touched on that like really hit home is that like this was sort of like for a lot of girls and women, like it's a nostalgic thing too, because it is like this big part of our childhood and going to sleepovers. And, I think it's like a sort of early kind of safe transgression, like it's nice, like poking at the barriers. But one thing that I love about Dreadful Splendor and what it really gets just like so spot on about the Gothic genre is like the slow, the slow disillusion of the walls between reality and fantasy. Like I love that sense of like you never know whether the characters are really experiencing what they're experiencing, or is it sleep exhaustion, or is it terror, or is it like any, number of things. And like I think you like manipulate that atmosphere really well in this book.
Oh, thank you so much. That's, lovely to hear. Mission accomplished.
Let's talk a little bit about Genevieve because she's amazing. Um, she's a really great main character, and I think she plays with like the tropes of Gothic heroines in some really interesting ways. Like she's really spunky and willful and like full of vigor, but she's not like this sort of like pure maiden, like like innocent sort of like naivete type person. She's like a con artist and she has like a stealing compulsion. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about like her and where she came from and kind of how you arrived at like her character.
Yeah, she has some street cred, right?
Yeah.
She's not coming into the situation, blindsided or completely green or innocent. She's the one who is pulling the strings, and and the behind the curtain. So it was an interesting way to write that ghost story, having someone who, is the one who's in charge of doing all the tricks.
Mm.
So she actually came to me, when I said, that I was thinking of the scene, the seance scene, doing it over and over, and I just naturally, saw a woman, as the lead, as the con artist. And so again, I just start asking myself questions. Who is this? Is this her story? Are we at the end, the beginning? What's going on?
Mm.
And I I started doing a little bit of research, and, about how people are doing seances and how the different gimmicks that they would use. And that's when I came up with, okay, London, 1852. And, when I had the setting, then it all sort of started to build on each other a little bit. So then I was able to, flesh her out a little bit more and see, okay, what circumstances would be for this woman who is on her own, who has this skill, but is also in dire straits, and what would be her obstacles, and what's motivating her to be in this situation, and why is it, life and death for her. So, just asking those questions, coming over. So she developed that way. But yeah, she was really fun to write. I really liked having someone who had, she feels like, opposites. That she's confident, but she's not. She's still, feels like she is lacking in so much, but also that she doesn't deserve to have those things in life that she's lacking.
Mm.
But she's also very strong and will fight for herself. So, a lot of conflicting characteristics for her.
Mm.
But it was really great to write her. It was really great to see her as the main character move through the story and being able to use her abilities to change things, and instead of just things happening or her just discovering things, it was her realizing, okay, the one skill that I have is, I can read people. I see everybody as a con. So every person that she meets, she was always looking at a way to use them for her benefit. But then she also would have, a softer side, and we would realize that she's this way because of what's happened to her, because she's trying to survive.
Mhm. Yeah, a lot of it is pure survival for her because she's um does live this very like marginalized, poverty-stricken life. And she is sort of in this really complicated relationship with like the societal elite, because she like depends on them and their like ability to like spend lots of money on like these kind of like whims, and stuff like that. But also like they could get her in a lot of trouble like if they notice what she's doing. So she kind of lives this like her life is like this high wire act, of like having to maintain this like this performance basically.
Right. Yes. And she's just a visitor in those lives. And she realizes that. So I think she's just in there for a small amount of time for what she needs to take, and then
Mhm.
skedaddles out. But um, as I say in the book, she's not just getting the monetary value from it, but she's also stealing in a way that family closeness, uh,
Mm.
when she's with people and actually bringing them peace. She's also stealing that family warmth from them, because that's something that she doesn't have.
That is such a good point. That's not really um something that occurred to me while I was reading, but you're absolutely correct, that she is sort of putting herself into these family structures. And you can kind of see that like battling itself out a little bit in her, because like as she is visiting the family, that she is working with for this like seance in order to get her out of a spot of trouble, she's kind of becoming attached with
Yes.
some of them, but that is like really coming up against her instinct to just like cut her losses and leave, so that like really provides some interesting character stakes. Like it's kind of testing who she is and the way that she's like survived all these years.
Yes. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And it's a different experience for her, because she feels a lot of kindness from the lawyer. Um, I'm drawing a blank. I am so sorry.
No worries.
Oh my God. Mr. Lockhart. Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Please
Yeah,
edit that out. You know what? I
for
have just
sure.
finished writing my another book. So that's where my mind is right now, sis. Okay. So yes, so Mr. Lockhart is so kind to her, and that's a new feeling for her. So she's not really quite sure what to do with that, because she's also conning him, and she
Mm.
starts to feel guilt from that. And she's like, what is this guilt? So yeah, it was a really great way to see her evolve. And I
Mm.
think a lot of the times she was so resistant to any kindness, because she she thinks that everyone's a con like she is, right?
Yeah, for sure. And like there's a lot of really interesting uh stuff going on in the situation that she finds herself in. So I would love to like let's like
Mm.
explicate this a little for the listeners. So she sort of like has been uh conscripted by this family by dueling forces within this like embattled family to do seances in order to sort of like get the information from the other side. I don't really know that I'd explained it particularly well, but she's caught in this really interesting situation. um it reminded me a little bit of like Hamlet, like using a performance in order to like get the truth out of like guilty consciences and stuff like that.
Never thought of it that way. Oh my
Yeah. So
God.
like, yeah, can you talk a little bit about the family that she has like sort of wiggled her way into here?
Right. So she has on one side is, Lord Pemberton, who is, the head of the household, but he's the head of the household almost, by default. So he is an outsider as much as she is because he is new to the house too. So she has him, and he is he's a very strong figure, but she's also realizing that there are other characters in the house who are very much considered part of the family who don't seem to have a lot of power at first, but they actually do. So the housekeeper, um, uh, again, I'm gonna forget her name. So the housekeeper, she has a lot of power over everyone in the house. So so there's that, and then there's Mr. Lockhart, who's the lawyer, and he's sort of in the middle. And then there's the memory of Audra is very strong as well, and that's kind of in the middle. And then you've got Mr. Sutterly, the ward, and he seems on the house of the housekeeper side, but then she learns a bit more. So I really love how there's not a definite not everyone is a victim and not everyone is a hero. So she's going through and discovering new things, and depending on, I guess, depending on what they can give her is how she's viewing them at the moment. And then that as she develops relationships with these people, or at least learns why they are the way they are, and they're not just she's not just, the housekeeper isn't just mean because out of spite, or because she's thinks that she's trying to take Lady Audra's place. There's other reasons for that. So she's really she's there to do one thing, but then when she gets all these relationships, and she thinks she knows what the right thing is to do, or at least the right thing for her, and as she learns more about the family, that just complicates matters, and she starts second guessing herself. And when you're paranoia, it's a great thing. It just creates all of this mess for her, and at the same time other things are going on in the house. So
it occurred to me, while I was reading, that like she's sort of experiencing imposter syndrome, but she's actually an imposter, So,
yes,
and like, but there's two levels to that, right? Because there's on the one hand in which she is like pretending to be a spiritualist in order to endear herself to these families, but on the other hand, she also is like a poor person who is like exists among these like very privileged people, and that's like another type of performance, in order to fit in with people who are of a different class than you.
yes, exactly. And there is a part in the novel where I think she had been trying to gain the confidence of one of the maids, because she thinks, as she's thinking, this if I get this maid to trust me, I'll be able to get a little bit more information about her, and this is going to help me. And Lord Pemberton finds out she was in the kitchen, and he's quite upset about that, and she's says something back to him like, well, um, I actually just, I'm motivated by, by helping people, and not by, how I think society dictates I should think if someone's lower than me or not. And which is so, because this shows that she sees, everything, even though she's very conscious of the fact that of where she is, she doesn't belong. But she's also a bit of a, she's a feminist in the way that she thinks that everybody should be treated the same way as well. So she has that insight as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very interesting. I really love her relationship with Pemberton too, because like he's another figure who sort of has like a very prickly outside, but like is on the inside is like a little vulnerable and is a little like more complex than he may seem at first. And like how did you see those two characters fitting together? Like, did you kind of plot the arc of their relationship, or did it kind of like come to you as you were writing, if that makes sense?
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. It for them, I knew what I wanted him to be, sort of a very gruff and stern figure in the beginning, and then I saw where I wanted them to end up. So so I just had to work that out with each scene. But as I was going through my outline, I'd be looking at things and like, and my editor was very good at this as well. She's like, okay, we need another scene between the two of them, because when you do get to that point, it has to feel earned. It can't just come out of the blue. So it was really fun to write those little baby steps uh, to help them get to that point. And a lot of the times I do have my plot, I've got my outline. I know that at the end of this, I don't know where it's going, but I know at the end of this chapter, there has to be a big twist or there has to be a big decision made. So I'll be writing along, and that's when inspiration strikes. As long, as I'm writing, that I think I know where I'm going, and then it goes a certain, different way. So even though I knew what they wanted to be at the beginning, and I knew what they wanted to be at the very end, and I had to work through it just to get them there. It was work, because that's the romance part, and that's kind of the fun part, and you want to get you want to get to those good scenes right away, but you have to earn. It has to be earned, or it's not satisfying for you or the reader. So I'm glad that you felt that worked out well for them.
I did. I really liked it. Um, so one last question before we wrap up. The reason that these people have come together is because Pemberton's new wife has died under really mysterious circumstances. And Lockhart, the lawyer, is bringing in Genevieve in order to sort of placate Pemberton and sort of make him put aside this pursuit of like finding out who killed his wife, while Pemberton is hiring her in order to sort of like get the truth about like what happened to Audra. So I'd like for you to maybe like tell us a little bit about like what was your inspiration for the figure of Audra, because without giving too much away, she's also a really interesting character that like plays into some tropes but then really like subverts some other tropes.
It is the memory of Audra that motivates most of the characters in this book. She looms very large in almost every scene that someone is talking about her. She is almost like this figure, this person who just seems this angelic figure, and Genevieve at the beginning just sees her as, she had an unfortunate end. She died the night before her wedding. She was very beautiful, very rich. So she has this idea of what Audra was, and she realizes that she has to do a little bit of investigating in order to pull off this con of a seance for it to be realistic enough to get the result that they're hoping for. And as she talks to more of the house guests, as she learns more, she's realizing that Audra isn't the person that she thought she was, but she owes a lot to her, because without her death, she wouldn't be in the situation that she is. She would probably still be in jail. She wouldn't. So it's odd that she begins the beginning kind of not resenting her, but dismissing her memory, and dismissing the other characters who are still very loyal to her. But as she learns, and as the reader goes through the story and learns more about Audra on their own, we see that she has a little bit more complicated character, and was also really much like Genevieve in the sense that she had very little control over what her future was going to be. And Genevieve ends up developing a real connection to her, which is proves to be a bit of an obstacle or a complication for her seance to be effective. So I think I wanted there to be so she had to, because her death is the very important part of the book, or the inciting moment, like that's why everyone is there. I really needed her to be a character who, even though she was just in memory, I needed her to be very, come off the page, and because she needed to be that bigger than life, because so many people were obsessed with her, really. So you had to kind of peel back those layers to see what was the cause of that.
Yeah, there's so much interesting stuff going on there. And I think that there's a really interesting thing to be said, I think, about the way that like each of these family members is sort of like remembering Audra in the way that they need to in order to justify the way that they're acting in the present, Like, so, like, even though the story is like ostensibly about Genevieve manipulating Audra's memory, like every character in this story is manipulating her memory to some extent, Like, it's really just interesting to see how all these different characters relate to her and then how that makes them relate to each other.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Well, do you think you'll ever return to these characters or to this world in another book?
You know what? My editor hasn't said anything. And I think I would love to, because I think I could totally see her, like, being like this lady detective
Yeah.
across Europe. But it was so fun to write this book, and I go back to that, the Pit and the Pendulum movie when I was 8. I think writing this book was a way to return to that castle and that dungeon, and it was so fun. And we'll see. Never say never. I don't have any plans, but yeah, that would be a lot of fun to put her in something else. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I really love her, and I just love her journey in this book, because she's so independent, but then she does really have to learn how to sort of depend on others in order to get herself out of this situation, even though that's like literally the scariest thing for her to do, I think.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for coming to talk to us. I really loved this book, and I'm so glad that you were able to make the time to come and talk to us and our listeners.
I'm thrilled to be able to do this with you. Thank you so much. I appreciate every kind thing you said about this book. It really makes me feel wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, listeners. As of the publication of this episode, A Dreadful Splendor will be available at your favorite library or independent bookstore, and I highly suggest you pick it up. For now, it is time to close this chapter. Bye-bye.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.